So I think everyone is in the meet already. So good day, gentlemen. We gather here today in this online meeting room to discuss and talk about the history of education and its foundations. This is very important because we, as future educators, should know the fundamental part of being a teacher. That also includes knowing its history, theories, and the people that contributed to it throughout the years.
So, where should we start? Because I think that there is a lot to talk about.
Well, one obvious history dates to the pre-illiterate times. Education developed from the human struggle for survival and enlightenment. Now, it may be formal and informal. Informal education refers to the general social process by which human beings acquire the knowledge and skills needed to function in their culture. Formal education refers to the process by which teachers instruct students in courses of study within institutions. So, before the invention of reading and writing, people lived in an environment in which they struggled to survive against natural forces, namely animals and other humans. So, to survive, pre-illiterate people developed skills that grew into cultural and educational patterns.
Yes, indeed, Mr. Mejares. It is very interesting to see how much humanity have developed and how advanced education become. After the pre-illiterate period follows the education of ancient Africa and Asia, these continents contains ancient civilizations who dwelled and thrived through the years. During these eras, religious authorities such as priests, monks, and gurus teach religion and other fields of learning. In its earliest forms, they also taught sciences, mathematics, and architecture. Most children in ancient Africa did not go to formal schools. Instead, many youths acquired skill by apprenticeship. Boys and girls were taught separately to help prepare each sex for their adult roles.
I would like to follow that up with the ancient Greece. Greece is probably the most popular place that influenced not just the Western formal education, but also to modern educational system as well. Ancient Greece was divided into a small and often competing city-states or polis, such as Athens, Sparta, and Thebes. Athens emphasized a humane and democratic society and education, while Sparta, which is the chief political enemy of Athens, was a dictatorship that used education for military training and drill. In contrast to Athens, Spartan girls received more schooling, but it was almost exclusively athletic training to prepare them to be healthy mothers of future Spartan soldiers. These forms of education and living is comparable to modern day South and North Korea. South Korea being Athens that uses democratic society and education, while on the other hand, North Korea is the Sparta, which is under a dictatorship rule that uses their education and people for military.
So now that you've mentioned education in Greece, it is also notable to talk about the education in the ancient Rome. The Romans were gaining control of the Italian peninsula and western Mediterranean territories. The study of philosophy was central to the Greek education. However, war, conquest, politics, and civic administration occupied the Romans. Only a small percentage of Romans went to school. Like in Greece, schooling was only available to those with the financial means to pay tuition and the leisure to attend class. Boys went to an elementary school called a ludus, whereas girls from wealthy households learned to read and write at home on occasion. Boys learned Latin and Greek grammars in secondary schools, which were taught by Greek and slave known as the pedagogues. So, in addition, we have Jewish education, which is also a major influence on Western learning. So, the ancient Jews held the printed word in high regard and believed that it was through the Bible that God revealed truth to them. The Bible and the Talmud, a book of religious and civil law, provide the majority of materials about ancient Jewish educational goals and techniques. So parents should teach their children religious beliefs, laws, ethical behaviors, and occupational skills, according to Jewish religious officials known as the rabbis.
During the medieval period, however, education is different. Only the wealthy had access to education, and then usually only for boys. There were no public schools, and those who had the privilege of getting an education usually either learned at home with a tutor or from a school run by the church. Because of this, religion informed every subject that students learned.
So, in addition to that, after the medieval period was the Renaissance period. It is a rebirth of learning. It began in Europe in the 14th century and reached its height in the 15th century. Scholars became more interested in the humanist features, that is, the secular or worldly rather than religious aspects, of the Greek and Latin classics. Humanist educators found their models of literary style in the classics. This also served as an influence to other educational philosophies.
There is also a period called Protestant Reformation period. The religious reformation of the 16th century marked a decline in the authority of the Catholic Church and contributed to the emergence of the middle classes in Europe. A major tenet of Protestantism that influenced their view on education was the idea of personal responsibility. What this meant was that the people needed to study for themselves and not just listen to the teacher. In a spiritual sense, that meant reading the Bible for one's self.
So, okay, on a more modern era, the education theory of the 17th century, educators on the century developed new ways of thinking about education. The Age of Enlightenment in the 18th century produced important changes in education and educational theory. And then, during the Enlightenment, or also called the Age of Reason, educators believed that people could improve their lives and society using their reason and the powers of their critical thinking.
So, in addition to that, Mr. Mejares, after the 18th century, we are now introduced to the 19th century. The foundations of modern education were established in this time period. There are philosophers like Locke, Rousseau, and Pestalozzi that developed theories that contributed to the development of education. And of course, in the 20th century of education, where we currently are, there are a lot of developments that happened. Technology has become a widely used tool. In our country, the Philippines, we also have our own history. I think Mr. Calipayan can provide a brief narration of our history.
Yes, of course. During the colonization of Spanish to our land, education was immediately introduced. Religious orders opened the first schools and universities as early as the 16th century. Spanish missionaries established schools immediately after reaching the islands. The Augustinians opened a parochial schools in Cebu in 1565. The public school system in the Philippines was born in 1863 with the passage of the Education Reform Act in the Spanish courts. Due to the compulsory education of Filipino children, separate schools for boys and girls were established in every pueblo. University education was started in the Philippines during the early part of the 17th century. Originally, the colleges and universities were open only to the Spaniards and those with the Spanish blood, or mestizos. It was only during the 19th century that these universities began accepting native Filipinos.
Phew! That wraps up the history of education globally and in the national context. And along with the theories that provided the building blocks of education, there are also laws and legal foundations. It is important for us to be knowledgeable on the legal basis because it serves as a guide for us future teachers on how to properly deal with our students. So, legal bases are provisions that give limitations to both the teacher and the students to avoid instances that may violate the rights of the two parties. So, understanding these legal bases could help us in knowing what are the things that a teacher must do and vice versa.
So, yes, Mr. Mejares, indeed, that is very true. And there are sources of laws in the Philippines too. First one is the Constitution. It is the fundamental and supreme law of the land. Second one is the statutes. It includes the acts of Congress, municipal charters, municipal legislation, court rules, administrative rules and orders, legislative rules, and presidential issuances. And the other one is treaties and conventions. These have the same force of authority as statutes. And for the last one is the judicial decisions. On Article 8 of the Civil Code, it provides that judicial decisions applying to interpreting the laws or the Constitution shall form part of the legal system of the Philippines. Only decisions of its Supreme Court established jurisprudence are binding on all over the courts.
I would like to add under the Constitution, we have the Philippines Constitution of 1987. During the Corazon Aquino's presidency, the 1987 Constitution went into effect. This Constitution included a number of important educational requirements. Free and compulsory public elementary education was declared. Free public high school and secondary education were also planned. Under the statutes, we have the Batas Pambansang Bilang 232, or better known as the Education Act of 1982, provides the latest and more specific provision on rights, duties, and parents' relation to education.
So yes, Mr. Calipayan, that is very true. So along with that, I just want to add what you said. This is about regulatory laws. There are plenty of these laws in the Philippine education field, and I'll name at least three of them. So first, we have the Republic Act of 7836, which is also known as the Professionalization Act of 1994, an act that's acted to strengthen the regulation and supervision of the practice of teaching in the Philippines and prescribing a licensure examination for teachers and for other purposes. Then we have the Republic Act 9293, which states that no person shall engage in teaching and or act as a professional teacher as defined in this act, whether in the preschool, elementary, or secondary level, unless the person is a duly registered professional teacher and a holder of a valid certificate of registration and a valid professional license. And the last one, we have the Magna Carta for 670. So the Magna Carta for public school teachers, or otherwise known as the Republic Act of 4670, was envisioned to provide programs for the promotion and improvement of the well-being and economic status of the public school teachers. So we also got the Ordinance SP 2340. This ordinance is the institutionalization of the alternative learning system, or ALS, in all barangays within Quezon City, providing guidelines therefore and for other purposes. So yeah, I think we're done discussing about some laws and legal basis of Philippine education. This is very, very important since every citizen has the freedom to choose a profession of course of study, provided that admission and academic standards are fair, reasonable, and equitable. So teachers' right to professional progress will be strengthened by the state. And also, non-teaching academic and non-academic personnel shall enjoy the protection of the state.
Yes, indeed, Mr. Mejares. But I would also like to add, Mr. Mejares, if you may. So, in the case of structure of Philippine education, we also adopted the K-12 curriculum. K-12 in the Philippines has three levels: primary school, or also known as primary education, from grade 1 to grade 6. And the other one is junior high school, or also known as lower secondary education, from grade 7 to grade 10. And for the last one, the senior high school, or also known as upper secondary education, from grades 11 to grade 12. We also have educational policies such as CFSS, or the Child-Friendly School System. We also have ECARP, Every Child a Reader program. The ECARP is a national program that addresses the trust of DepEd to make every Filipino child a reader at his or her own level. It is designed to equip elementary pupils with strategic reading and writing skills to make them independent young readers and writers. We also have Brigada Escuela, which is observed usually in the month of May before the enrollment. We also have the Adopt a School Act. This allows private entities to assist a public school, whether elementary, secondary, or tertiary, preferably located in any of the 20 poorest provinces identified by the Presidential Council for Countryside Development or any other government. And then we have the ALS program. ALS program is expanded and strengthened to provide increased opportunities for out-of-school children in special cases and adult learners, including indigenous peoples, to develop basic and functional literacy and life skills, and pursue an equivalent pathway to complete basic education.
So yeah, I think we have discussed everything. We have talked about the theories. We have talked about the history. We have talked about the people that contributed to what the education is now. And Thank you so much, gentlemen, for sparing some time and joining me in this online meeting today. I hope you have a good day, and I hope we also meet soon for another discussion of along with this topic. So thank you so much, and goodbye.